Welcome back. It's been a big day in college football. We've seen a number of quarterbacks get named starters of their respective teams, and it's going to be fun to go through some of these guys and discuss what it means. We'll start with Syracuse. Steve Angeli is named the starter today, and this is a guy who comes in from Notre Dame, and the situation with Syracuse was an interesting one. In the spring, Fran Brown names Ricky Collins the starting quarterback, and then they go right out and get another quarterback. That was kind of surprising, but this is a team that obviously knew it was going to have to replace Kyle McCord, and they knew that it was going to be a battle. Even if you brought someone in, even if you didn't, it was going to be a battle. Now, it's kind of confusing why they decided to name Ricky Collins the starter in the spring. Why not bring that into the fall? But I guess maybe that's just part of how they viewed it. They did view that Ricky Collins was the starter and Angeli was able to come in and win the job. Now, we knew that Angeli was looking for a place to start. We knew that he was competing at Notre Dame with CJ Carr and Kenny Minchie. You knew that that was going to be a three-man race, and he decided that he wanted to go somewhere where he was either going to get the spot or compete with one other guy for that spot. He comes to Syracuse and he beats out Ricky Collins for that job. I think that's something that wasn't super surprising if you were paying attention to that whole scenario, but it's still something that's, I think, going to be something to pay attention to for the beginning of the year. Again, we're getting close to the season. The season is nearly upon us, and Syracuse has a big game against Tennessee. Maybe you want some stability at quarterback. Now, it doesn't guarantee that Ricky Collins will not play, but it does mean that they are very high on Steve Angeli. Another thing we saw today is Cam Newton's number 2 is going to be retired at Auburn. It's hard to believe that it's been 15 years since we watched Cam Newton play at Auburn, one of the greatest runs by a college football quarterback that we've ever seen. And it's well deserved. The number 2 should not be worn at Auburn ever again. And I'm surprised, honestly, that it took this long. CBS Sports released its 30 coaches under 30, and there were some names to keep an eye on. The biggest one that I really noticed, obviously, was Mackenzie Milton. His story has been phenomenal. He's back at UCF, but there are a number of quarterbacks that are well deserving of that. You look at some of the other guys that just recently played. That's going to be a fun list to pay attention to down the road. Coaching is such a fun way for players to keep their college experience going in a way and keep them within college football. So if you haven't checked out that list, make sure you check it out. I'm not going to list it all off. Someone put in a lot of work for that, but that was a list that was very interesting to see. And then the biggest news probably for quarterbacks was Ohio State naming Julian Sayin as the starter for the Buckeyes. This was a competition that we had talked about earlier. I had posted a video about, is Lincoln Kienholz really pushing Julian Sayin for that spot, or is he pushing him just to be a better version of himself? I thought that Julian Sayin was going to be the starter, and I think it was just I don't want to say a tactic, but a strategy for Ryan Day and this staff to get him to play at the level that they knew he was capable of playing. They knew that he was going to be a good quarterback. We saw a lot of things about him even last year too, when Will Howard was still around. So you knew that he had the talent. I think it was just a matter of whether or not he could take that spot and command the starting spot. We now know that it's his job, and now we get to know that it's Julian Sayin versus Arch Manning in week 1 when Texas plays Ohio State. The other thing on Ohio State you saw is Austin Servo was named the left tackle. Yeah, that was an interesting thing to announce as well. You knew that there were some positions that were up for grabs. Left tackle is one of them. So Sayin not only knows that his job is secure, but he also knows that the guy that's protecting his blind spot is secure as well. So that was something very interesting to see at Ohio State. We saw a number of big announcements this week and even just today, and getting the left tackle figured out for Ohio State and getting the quarterback figured out were two big things for this team. With some of the games coming up this weekend, Big 12 depth charts have been released. Iowa State, Kansas State, and Kansas. We've seen those teams release their depth charts. Not a ton of surprising things. There are some depth chart things that are listed as, or I think the biggest one for me was Iowa State listing Carson Hansen as RB1, not because he's RB1, but that fact that there's no or involved. Abu Sama is going to be part of that rotation, but it's obviously Carson Hansen's job, and he's going to be a big part of that offense. That's going to be a fun week 0 game. We have previews coming out, previews and predictions coming out later this week, so stay tuned for that. Some unfortunate news for the Virginia Cavaliers. Cam Robinson, their star linebacker, is expected to miss a few games. He's out with a collarbone injury. Now, Cam Robinson is someone who was going to be a leader of this defense and still will be, but this is a defense that needed him to be healthy. They already lost a couple players due to injury in fall camp, and Cam Robinson is just the latest one to miss some time. And if Virginia is going to be better this year, they need him to be healthy and making plays. So that's something to keep an eye on. His timetable is now just a few games, but maybe it'll be longer. It depends on his recovery. A few other group of 5 notes that we'll just go through quickly. Jack Lane was named starting quarterback at New Mexico. That is going to be fun to watch Jason Eck and that program, how they rebuild after Bronco Mendenhall left. Chase Jenkins, a redshirt freshman, is named starter at Rice. And Brandon Rose, a former BYU player, is named the starter at UMass. Some bigger names to keep an eye on. Now, I'm not entirely sure how you actually say his name, but Devin Brown's replacement, if you will, Jaron Kiawe Segapalute, is going to be a really interesting guy to watch. He's going to be an interesting player to pay attention to, and he is someone that has a lot of talent, comes from Oregon, and has the ability to win this spot. I think a lot of people just assumed that Devin Brown was going to be that guy. Now, the quarterback position for Cal is going to play a huge role in general, but with the talent they lost at running back, that kind of brings some uncertainty. The passing attack might have to do a little bit more while they establish who's going to be that starting running back. Drew Messemaker takes over the starting position at North Texas. You brought in Reese Poppenbarger from Miami to potentially push him for that spot, and he took control of that job and now was named the starter as of today. That is an offense that has a ton of potential for the 2025 season. They could be a sleeper team. There's a lot that they need to fix. There's a lot that they need to replace, and having him at quarterback gives you kind of a solid piece, a stable piece, if you will, to be able to make that offense go at a rate which you would expect. The other final note we'll talk about is Minnesota is naming Drake Lindsey as QB1. PJ Fleck made an announcement and said that Drake Lindsey is going to be the guy, which is not really that surprising, but it's nice to have that be out there. And Drake Lindsey is someone who's going to have to play really well for Minnesota to have success this year. We've seen what this team is capable of doing when they have a good quarterback, and Drake Lindsey is the next guy up. The guy has a really good frame at 6'5", and he has plenty of talent coming back around him that should be able to make plays. You have some new faces that will be taking over. You have some new wide receivers that are going to make his life potentially easier. But I think the biggest thing is that you see him as QB1. That was a big step for him in terms of his confidence. They feel really good about him, and the guys he'll throw to will make his life really fun. We just don't know who that's going to be. And we kind of talked about that. Is Coy Parrish going to play both ways? Is someone like Logan Loya or Javon Tracy, who come in from the transfer portal, Malachi Coleman even, are those guys going to be able to step up? Lemeke Brockington comes back. You look at the tight end position, Jamison Gears. You have a number of guys that are kind of in question right now because you don't know who's going to be that reliable player, but it's going to sort itself out, and that's going to be a really fun time for Minnesota in 2025. And that is the big news from the day for the most part at quarterback. There are a few other things obviously that happened that we'll dive into probably in another video, but this is some big news. We've seen some big names. Julian Sayin, Steve Angeli are two biggest ones, but other guys like Drake Lindsey, Cam Robinson being out, those are some notable things that are going to have big impacts on their teams. And as always, subscribe to the channel, and we'll see you in the next video.